I wanted to share a few thoughts about what we may have learned as humans living through this pandemic and having to exercise various kinds of social distancing or physical distancing. What has that meant for us, and what can it allow us to learn about ourselves? Well, first, social or physical distancing. The virus and its threat requires that we take measures whereby we don't engage with others in the way we normally do. We are relegated to our homes, and when we do go outside, we are required to exercise caution and take a number of measures. Engaging with others has been disrupted in a way that we probably didn't anticipate would ever happen. And what a lot of people have been doing in terms of getting around that issue of not being in the presence of others, but still having social connections, has been to use such technologies as video conferencing, chatting, Zooming their day away in order to remain connected with others. And this is quite wonderful, and sometimes I wonder what it must have been in the times of the Great Plague, for example, to be quarantined, because such technological means of reaching out were not available. So in some ways, we are fortunate to have these tools and to be able to use them to stay in touch with people whom we cannot see in real life. However, there is something still missing in this kind of social connection, and that is being in the presence of others, sharing the same space, the same air, the same soundscape, being in the material presence of an other is something that we experience on a daily basis normally under normal circumstances, and do not really ever think about unless there is a major disruption such as the one we are experiencing. And so while technology allows us to still stay in touch with people, well, the phrase itself is interesting, stay in touch. We're not really in touch. We're communicating, we're seeing each other, we're hearing each other, but there's no possibility of touch. And that, I think, is something that people are missing quite a great deal. And it tells us something about the kind of beings we are. When we say we are interconnected beings or entangled beings, we are also entangled in this way that we need this kind of presence of others, physical presence of others, sharing spaces with others, in addition to interacting with others in all kinds of other ways that we do. So while the technology is wonderful and helpful, it is not enough. Now, this is about experiencing being isolated and being at home. Few thoughts I have about that. Now, what about relaxing confinement? Because this is starting to happen in multiple locations in various ways again. I just wonder what kind of interactions we will be having with others whom we have been wanting to interact with. So we're missing the physical presence of others, but at the same time, the physical presence of the other is a threat to us, or I may be a threat to them if either one of us is carrier of that virus. So people have been reflecting about this, and there is certainly a level of fear of the other that is experienced by a lot of people, that is a new thing. I think most humans are fundamentally trustful of others, sometimes to their detriment. But now that any other person constitutes a threat to me, or I may be a threat to them, and I become conscious of this, my interactions with the others are going to be dramatically impacted. Going for a walk, respecting physical distancing, you think about the presence of the other in a way that you never have. If you see an other walking toward you on the sidewalk, you have to make decisions to avoid them. And that sounds banal, but it's a new type of behavior that, again, we didn't have prior to the pandemic. You would just cross paths on the sidewalk and say hello and go your merry way. Now you have to make decisions to avoid them. And how this is going to have a long-term impact on the way people interact with each other is something I think a lot about, and I'm not sure whether we're going to now live in a society where we consider other people to be threats. The Sartrean sentence came back to mind in this context. Hell is other people, a famous claim made by a character in the play No Exit. And I'm wondering now if this is not going to become true in another way post-pandemic. Certainly during the pandemic, the other is conceived as a threat, and how long that will linger in how we conceive our relations with others is going to be interesting to observe. And so that leads me to question, when people talk about returning to normal, what returning to normal will mean. Well, first, I want to ask the question, is returning to normal, if normal is whatever it was that the world was before the pandemic, I want to ask, is returning to normal that desirable? The world was constituted in such a way, and the way we existed in that world was such that it led to the possibility of the unfolding of a pandemic and all of its consequences. It has been deadly for a lot of people. It has left a lot of people incapacitated. It has put people out of jobs. It has created all kinds of social and economic, financial hardships for people. The most vulnerable people in our societies are very badly impacted by the pandemic because there were already structures in place that put them at a disadvantage. And so I'm not sure that we want to go back to a world where there were such structures that put people at a disadvantage and more likely to be negatively impacted if anything like this pandemic was to recur, which it is likely that it will. So the return to normal, I think, needs to be questioned. And I personally don't think that we want to return to what normal was. And I'm not even sure it will be possible because of what I said about how we now perceive the other. I think the lesson or what we may learn through all this and in the various ways in which we experience the pandemic is that we are always fundamentally vulnerable because we are entangled beings, embodied, embedded, always in relation with others, and not just human others, but all the non-human others, such as viruses. Because we are always in this web of interrelations, we're always vulnerable. And this is not something we like to think about or that we are very aware of in so-called normal times. So I think people have been shocked by the unfolding of the pandemic, the extent of the damage caused by the virus, and the various ways in which they are now under threat from the virus. But that is because they didn't conceive of themselves as vulnerable in the first place. Now, to realize that such a tiny being as a virus could cause such havoc and has such agentic capacity, the capacity to disrupt human life and societies as a whole, is something, yes, that may come as a shock, but that was an important realization. Now, what we do with that realization and understanding of ourselves as a deeply interconnected post-pandemic is up to us.